What do you call a prime minister who won an election on one platform and then immediately starts dismantling the very promises that got him elected? A threat to democracy. That's the explosive accusation being leveled at Keir Starmer right now, and it's coming from some serious quarters. The charge is simple but devastating. Starmer is trying to undo Brexit by stealth. He's talking about aligning with the EU single market despite explicit manifesto promises not to. He's treating the largest democratic vote in British history as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a decision to be respected. And he's doing it all while his approval ratings are in freefall and his own backbenchers are getting restless. This isn't pragmatic leadership, this is capitulation. This is a man who's unable to lead Britain forward, so he's trying to drag it backwards into the EU's regulatory embrace. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we hold power to account. Let's break down why Starmer's latest move on Brexit might be the biggest threat to British democracy since Brexit itself. So here's what's happened. This week, Starmer signaled that Britain should align with the EU single market. Not rejoin it officially, that would be too obvious, but align with it. Which sounds innocent enough until you understand what alignment actually means. The single market isn't a technical arrangement or a menu from which you pick the dishes you like. It's a legal, political, and regulatory system. Alignment means rule-taking. Rule-taking means surrendering sovereignty. And surrendering sovereignty without consent is an affront to the largest democratic vote in British history. That's the argument being made, and it's a powerful one, because Starmer's Labour Manifesto explicitly promised not to rejoin the single market. He campaigned on respecting the Brexit vote, and now, less than a year into government, he's already backtracking. The accusation is that this reversal is being smuggled out under the banner of the national interest. Ah yes, the national interest. That magical phrase that politicians trot out whenever they want to do something deeply unpopular and pretend it's actually for your own good. The national interest is so overused, so abused, that it's become meaningless. When a policy was never put to the electorate, never tested in a manifesto, and never endorsed by voters, invoking the national interest is not leadership, it's evasion. That's a quote from the critique, and it's absolutely spot on. You can't just do whatever you want and call it the national interest. That's not how democracy works. Democracy requires consent. And the British people did not consent to realigning with the EU single market. In fact, they explicitly rejected it when they voted for Brexit. The response from Labour's pro-EU faction has been revealing. There's been barely suppressed delight. Ministers and backbenchers rushed to celebrate the prizing open of a door the British people had deliberately and decisively shut. This tells you everything you need to know about what's really going on. Labour has always had a significant pro-EU faction. People who never accepted Brexit, who think it was a mistake, who've been waiting for the opportunity to reverse it. And now they think their moment has come. Starmer is giving them cover to start the process of undoing Brexit piece by piece. Not through a second referendum, not through an honest campaign to rejoin, but through incremental alignment that eventually leaves Britain back in the EU in all but name. The justifications being offered are familiar. We're assured that exporters are clamoring for it, that business is desperate for it, that it will miraculously ease the cost of the weekly shop. These claims are offered as self-evident truths, yet none withstand serious scrutiny. And this is where the critique gets really sharp, because if Labour were genuinely concerned about helping businesses or lowering household costs, they wouldn't be suffocating enterprise and families alike under punitive taxation, relentless regulation, and eye-watering energy bills. Labour has raised taxes by £70 billion. They've hiked employers' national insurance, which hits businesses hard. They've increased business rates. They've maintained high energy prices. They've piled regulation on top of regulation. If they actually cared about making it easier to do business in Britain, they'd reverse those policies. But they don't. Instead, they're blaming Brexit for economic problems that are actually caused by their own policy choices. And they're using those problems as justification for realigning with the EU. Re-entangling Britain in Brussels' regulatory web is not an economic rescue plan. It's a convenient distraction from a government that has chosen to make Britain a harder, not easier place to do business. That's the real story here. Labour's economic policies aren't working. Growth is stagnant, businesses are struggling, people are worse off. And instead of admitting their policies are the problem, they're blaming Brexit and saying that's the real issue. If only we were aligned with the EU, everything would be fine. It's deflection, it's scapegoating, and it's dishonest. What's absent from this chorus of approval is any respect for democratic instruction. Brexit was not a suggestion, it was a decision, one endorsed again in a general election where both parties pledged to honor it. This is the core democratic argument. In 2016, the British people voted to leave the EU. 17.4 million people, the largest democratic mandate in British history. Then, in 2019, the Conservatives won a landslide on a platform of getting Brexit done. And in 2024, both Labour and Conservatives campaigned on manifestos that accepted Brexit and promised not to rejoin the single market. At every stage, the democratic process has confirmed that Britain should be outside the EU and outside the single market. So where does Starmer get the authority to reverse that decision? He doesn't have it. He's not governing with a mandate to undo Brexit. He's governing with a mandate that explicitly promised to respect it, and he's breaking that promise. Starmer insists this doesn't mean freedom of movement will return. We're invited to believe that Britain can align with the single market while rejecting one of its foundational freedoms. This is fantasy. And this is where the whole thing falls apart. Because the EU has been crystal clear for decades. The four freedoms of the single market, that's free movement of goods, services, capital, and people, are indivisible. You can't pick and choose. If you want access to the single market, you accept all four freedoms. There's no a la carte option. Starmer knows this, his advisors know this, but they're pretending somehow Britain can align with the single market while keeping controls on immigration. It's a lie. Brussels has been perfectly clear for decades. The four freedoms stand or fall together. Any youth mobility scheme, any sector-by-sector alignment, any regulatory convergence will be used as leverage to prise the door further open. This is the slippery slope that Brexit supporters always warned about. Give the EU an inch and they'll take a mile. Start with some small alignment on regulations, then add a youth mobility scheme, then sector-by-sector access, then before you know it, you're back in the single market in all but name, and freedom of movement has returned through the back door. Concessions invite demands. Alignment begets integration. Once you start down this path, it's very hard to stop. And the EU knows that. They're patient. They'll take whatever they can get now and come back for more later. That's how the European project has always worked. Incremental integration. And Starmer's playing right into their hands. Nor is this about economics alone. It's about power. The single market places ultimate authority in the hands of institutions Britain does not elect and cannot remove. It subordinates British law to European courts. It hollows out parliamentary accountability. That was the core reason people voted leave. The British people wanted to be self-governed. This is the sovereignty argument, and it's fundamental. Brexit wasn't primarily about immigration or economics, though those were factors. It was about democracy and self-governance. People wanted British laws to be made by British politicians who they could vote for and vote out. They didn't want to be governed by unelected EU commissioners and European Court of Justice judges. That's what taking back control meant. And aligning with the single market means giving up that control. It means accepting rules made in Brussels by people British voters have no say over. It means European courts having jurisdiction over British law. It means Parliament being unable to change regulations even if they're bad for Britain. That's not sovereignty, that's subordination. Starmer's defenders claim he's being serious, avoiding the theatrics of Brexit politics. In truth, there's nothing more theatrical than reopening settled questions because you lack the courage to govern on the platform you were elected on. This is a devastating line because it's true. The people claiming to be the adults in the room, the serious politicians who are above the culture wars and the partisan bickering, are actually the ones reopening the most divisive question in modern British politics. Brexit was settled. Multiple referendums and elections confirmed it. The country had moved on. And Starmer is dragging everyone back into that debate because he doesn't have the courage or competence to govern on the platform he was elected on. He promised to fix the economy, to improve the NHS, to control immigration, to make Brexit work. He's failing at all of those things. So instead of admitting failure and changing course, he's blaming Brexit and proposing to undo it. That's not serious leadership, that's desperate flailing. A prime minister secure in his mandate does not start dismantling it piece by piece. He does not provoke a constitutional argument because his polling is poor. He does not treat voters as an inconvenience to be managed rather than citizens to be respected. And that's the heart of it. Starmer's approval ratings are abysmal. Labor's poll numbers are dropping. The May local elections are going to be a disaster. So what does he do? Does he listen to voters and change his policies? No, he doubles down on the very approach that's making him